Greetings, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland. So here I am in London on Carlisle Square, and this is the house where Sir Osbert Sitwell spent most of his adult life. As you can see, it's very generously proportioned, about 5 stories. Well, you know, if you include the basement. And we're in Chelsea, which is one of the most chic areas in Londinium. Anyway, Sir Osbert wasn't born here. He's born in St James's, an area of London about 2.5 miles away, as in near St James's Palace, which is even plusher. And many of the buildings there date back to the 17th century. This is mid-19th century. So his father was a baronet. Osbert was the eldest of the children. He said he had one brother, Sir Cheverel, and a sister, Edith. I don't think there were other siblings, and that's why Osbert inherited the baronetcy. That's why he's Sir Osbert. And after his name in the blue plaque says B.T. Baronet, as in to say he inherited it, passed from father to son, as opposed to a knighthood, which is for the lifetime of that individual only, dies with him, cannot be passed on. Only the eldest son can get the baronetcy, and only if you're born within holy matrimony. What was I going to say about him? He's not very well known now, but in the mid-20th century he was a widely appreciated writer and wit, and he wrote satire almost entirely. So although he's born in London, he spent a lot of his childhood in Scarborough and Derbyshire, where they had family seats, a prominent family. His father mainly collected antiques, drew up family trees, a gentleman of leisure. They're very wealthy. I'm not quite sure how. So Osbert, that wasn't his real name. It's actually his middle name. His Christian name was Francis, but always known as Osbert for some reason I'm not sure of. Anyway, he went to Ludgrove, which is a prep school in Berkshire, probably the top prep school in the empire as it was at those days, although Ludgrove had not been founded so long before. When I heard of it, people were always calling it La Ludgrove, I think because they're meant to be la-di-da people who go there. But anyway, like Prince William and Prince Harry went there as well. Like about half the boys at Ludgrove, he went on to Eton, and he wasn't that academic. There was they learned loads of classics, which he found quite tedious, although he was a reasonably handy sportsman. So he had no thought of going to university. These days, 50% of young people in the United Kingdom go on to university. When he left school around about 1910, it would have been much, much lower, like about 2%. But from Eton, it was quite easy. They say, well, what do you think you'll do? Do you think you'll go and join the family firm and go home, run the estate or whatever? Say, you know, I quite like rowing, so I think I'll go to university. People go for completely non-academic reasons sometimes in those days. And the housemaster say, well, I'll write to my friend who was at college with me, and I'll make sure you get into the House or whatever, or Magdalen or Trinity College, Cambridge, or one of those. But that wasn't for him, because you had to be pretty hot at Latin, Greek and maths to get in. He decided to be an army officer, and he joined some cavalry regiment, but that didn't pan out too well. I'm not quite sure why. And then decided to join the Grenadier Guards. So there's the household division, as in about the royal household. There were back then there were 8 regiments: the cavalry regiments, the Blues, the Royals, and the Life Guards. The Blues and Royals are now amalgamated into one regiment, the Blues and Royals. And then there are the 5 regiments of foot guards as part of that, which are in order of foundation. I've got this right: the Coldstream Guards, the Scots Guards, the Grenadier Guards, the Irish Guards, the Welsh Guards. Anyway, he decided to join the Grenadier Guards. Grenadier Guards originally were very tall, so every battalion would be roughly 500 men, about 5 companies each of about 100 soldiers each. And you take the tallest men from the battalion, put them in one company, 100 soldiers selected for their height. The idea is they throwed grenades, as it invented at Granada, around about 1700, because the idea is you're taller, have a longer reach, you can throw further, and generally speaking that's true. So if there was ever a big attack where lots of grenades need to be thrown, the Grenadiers would go forward. But anyway, the Grenadier Guards, they took lots of Grenadier companies and put them into one battalion. Well, sometimes there were several battalions. They're all down to single battalions, the Guards regiments now, as in one battalion of Coldstream Guards, one battalion of Grenadier Guards. There was a time there would have been several battalions. But anyway, he served there. So they are guards because they're guarding the royal family in London. You see them in those scarlet tunics and black busbies, as in bearskin hats, stomping around in front of Buckingham Palace, St James's Palace. They used to march to the Bank of England every night and back until 1970. So that's what they were about. and he joined them. And so the officers in those regiments tend to be the most upper class, and they would join the regiment because they wanted an army career that wasn't too onerous. So there's a lot of drill, as in square bashing, campaigning all the way from let me see, so it's from Horse Guards to Buckingham Palace and back, staying in Wellington Barracks and other places like that. So public duties, as in just being on show. And they could carry on their social life and politicking, but the social life they expected to lead was very pricey. They needed to have a private income, as in inherited loads of wealth, owned an estate, shares, a trust fund, baby, or whatever. So perhaps he was a trustafarian. And they'd either be super posh and conventional. It's maybe not quite like that anymore. But so what else about the Grenadier Guards? But then the First World War came out on, and all the stops were pulled out. Only on really major wars were they actually sent to fight. They mostly stayed here. So he had to sing for a supper, went to France and fought in the trenches. And he'd never thought of putting pen to paper, but at this point he thought, well, you know, I might be looking at eternity very soon. So just in case he died, he decided to compose some poesy, and he found it therapeutic. So he began to write more and more about his wartime experience. Indeed, later wrote a novel about it before the bombardment, his very first ever novel. So he came back from the war. He stood for Parliament in the Liberal interest. I can't remember where, somewhere in Northern England. He got 38% of the vote, so quite creditable, but he lost to the Unionist, which is i.e. Conservatives, although the Unionists had absorbed the Liberal Unionists by that stage. So that was his only ever foray in politics. Later on started to identify more with the Conservatives, though he never formally joined the party, and he wasn't too open about it. So mostly he was, well, I would say a man of letters, but he's more into his work is more light reading. He's known for his caustic remarks and just being a cleverable sort, always immaculately turned out, like going to dinner parties, a bit squiffy. People used to sometimes slag him off about that. So he knew the then Duke of York quite well, the man who later became King George VI. And so, like most people, Sir Osbert Sitwell deeply disapproved of Edward VIII's behaviour, saying, you know, you let the side down, it's not just about you, what about your sense of duty? But he also disliked some of the hangers-on who'd been sucking up to Edward VIII because they knew he would be king, and he was king, but then who dropped him like a hot potato once they felt that he was damaged goods. So he wrote a bitchy poem about that one, but he didn't let it get published because he could have been had up in court for libel, as in lying in a way that damaged people's reputation. So after the First World War, he was a bit too old to be one of the bright young things, but sort of on the edge of that circle of wealthy, fashionable, good-looking people in London. But he certainly wasn't anti-German, and he visited Germany several times, in Italy, and he became fascinated with art. Remember, he'd grown up in a house which was filled with objets d'art. So those were his two favourite countries. I'm not sure if he ever married, actually. So yeah, his sister and his brother Sir Chevreul were also well known. Osbert Sitwell, who was asked to write his entry in Who's Who. Before the internet, how did you know who a famous person was? Or you'd heard of this well-known person, but you didn't know that much about their background. How did you check the biodata? From the 19th century, a book was published, Who's Who, asking all sorts of prominent people to write an entry, as in judges, politicians, writers, and business people. And in his Who's Who entry for education, he notoriously wrote "in the holidays from Eton," as in that he learnt almost zilch when he was there. So that's a sort of witticism which has entered immortality. So anyway, after the Second World War, he was stricken by Parkinson's disease, but he still visited Italy a lot, and indeed it's in Florence where he died and is buried with a copy of his first novel. So that is Osbert Sitwell, a very gifted writer. Toodaloo.